Chief Executive and CEO redirect here. For other uses, see Chief Executive, disambiguation, and CEO, disambiguation. A Chief Executive Officer, CEO, 1, also known as a Central Executive Officer, or just Chief Executive, CE, or as Managing Director, MD, in the UK, is the highest officer charged with the management of an organization, especially a company or non-profit institution. CEOs find roles various organizations, including public and private corporations, non-profit organizations, and even some government organizations, notably state-owned enterprises. The CEO of a corporation or company typically reports to the board of directors and is charged with maximizing the value of the business, 1, which may include maximizing the share price, market share, revenues, or another element. In the nonprofit and government sector, CEOs typically aim at achieving outcomes related to the organization's mission, usually provided by legislation. CEOs are also frequently assigned the role of the main manager of the organization and the highest-ranking officer in the C-suite. 2. Origins. The term Chief Executive Officer is attested as early as 1782, when an ordinance of the Congress of the Confederation of the United States of America used the term to refer to governors and other leaders of the executive branches of each of the 13 colonies. 3. In draft additions to the Oxford English Dictionary published online in 2011, the dictionary says that the use of CEO as an acronym for a Chief Executive Officer originated in Australia, with the first attestation being in 1914. The first American usage cited is from 1972. 4. Responsibilities. The responsibilities of an organization's CEO are set by the organization's board of directors or other authority, depending on the organization's structure. They can be far-reaching or quite limited, and are typically enshrined in a formal delegation of authority regarding business administration. Typically, responsibilities include being an active decision-maker on business strategy and other key policy issues, leader, manager, and executor. The communicator role can involve speaking to the press and to the public, as well as to the organization's management and employees. The decision-making role involves high-level decisions about policy and strategy. The CEO is tasked with implementing the goals, targets and strategic objectives as determined by the board of directors. As an executive officer of the company, the CEO reports the status of the business to the board of directors, motivates employees, and drives change within the organization. As a manager, the CEO presides over the organization's day-to-day operations. 5, 6, 7. The CEO is the person who is ultimately accountable for a company's business decisions, including those in operations, marketing, business development, finance, human resources, etc. The use of the CEO title is not necessarily limited to describing the owner or the head of a company. For example, the CEO of a political party is often entrusted with fundraising, particularly for election campaigns. International use. In some countries, there is a dual board system with two separate boards, one executive board for the day-to-day business and one supervisory board for control purposes, selected by the shareholders. In these countries, the CEO presides over the executive board and the chairperson presides over the supervisory board, and these two roles will always be held by different people. This ensures a distinction between management by the executive board and governance by the supervisory board. This allows for clear lines of authority. The aim is to prevent a conflict of interest and too much power being concentrated in the hands of one person. In the United States, the board of directors, elected by the shareholders, is often equivalent to the supervisory board, while the executive board may often be known as the executive committee, the division/subsidiary heads and C-level officers that report directly to the CEO. In the United States, and in business, the executive officers are usually the top officers of a corporation, the chief executive officer, CEO, being the best-known type. The definition varies. For instance, the California Corporate Disclosure Act defines executive officers as the 5 most highly compensated officers not also sitting on the board of directors. In the case of a sole proprietorship, an executive officer is the sole proprietor. In the case of a partnership, an executive officer is a managing partner, senior partner, or administrative partner. In the case of a limited liability company, an executive officer is any member, manager, or officer. Related positions. Main article, corporate title. Depending on the organization, a CEO may have several subordinate executives to help run the day-to-day administration of the company, each of whom has specific functional responsibilities referred to as senior executives. 8. Executive officers or corporate officers. Subordinate executives are given different titles in different organizations, but one common category of subordinate executive, if the CEO is also the president, is the vice president, VP. An organization may have more than one vice president, each tasked with a different area of responsibility, example, VP of Finance, VP of Human Resources. Examples of subordinate executive officers who typically report to the CEO include the Chief Operating Officer, COO, Chief Financial Officer, CFO, Chief Strategy Officer, CSO, and Chief Business Officer, CBO. The public relations-focused position of Chief Reputation Officer is sometimes included as one such subordinate executive officer, but, as suggested by Anthony Jondrow, CEO of Reputation Economy Advisors, it can also be seen as simply another way to add emphasis to the role of a modern-day CEO, where they are both the external face of, and the driving force behind, an organization culture. 9. United States. In the U.S., the term Chief Executive Officer is used primarily in business, whereas the term Executive Director is used primarily in the not-for-profit sector. These terms are generally mutually exclusive and refer to distinct legal duties and responsibilities. Citation needed. United Kingdom. In the UK, Chief Executive and Chief Executive Officer are used in local government, business, and the charitable sector. 10. As of 2013, the use of the term director for senior charity staff is deprecated to avoid confusion with the legal duties and responsibilities associated with being a charity director or trustee, which are normally non-executive, unpaid, roles. The term managing director is often used in lieu of chief executive officer. Celebrity CEOs. Business publicists since the days of Edward Bernays, 1891 to 1995, and his client John D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937, and even more successfully the corporate publicists for Henry Ford, promoted the concept of the celebrity CEO. Business journalists have often adopted this approach, which assumes that the corporate achievements, especially in the arena of manufacturing, are produced by uniquely talented individuals, especially the heroic CEO. In effect, journalists celebrate a CEO who takes distinctive strategic actions. The model is the celebrity in entertainment, sports, and politics. Compare the great man theory. Goodhay et al. Argues that these individuals are not self-made, but rather are created by a process of widespread media exposure to the point that their actions, personalities, and even private lives function symbolically to represent significant dynamics and tensions prevalent in the contemporary business atmosphere. 11. Journalism thereby exaggerates the importance of the CEO and tends to neglect harder to describe broader corporate factors. There is little attention to the intricately organized technical bureaucracy that actually does the work. Hubris sets in when the CEO internalizes the celebrity and becomes excessively self-confident in making complex decisions. There may be an emphasis on the sort of decisions that attract the celebrity journalists. 12. Research published in 2009 by Ulrika Malmendier and Jeffrey Tate indicates that firms with award-winning CEOs subsequently underperform, in terms both of stock and of operating performance. 13. Criticism. Executive compensation. Main article, Executive compensation controversy. Executive compensation has been a source of criticism following a dramatic rise in pay relative to the average worker's wage. For example, the relative pay was 20 to 1 in 1965 in the US, but had risen to 376 to 1 by 2014. The relative pay differs around the world, and, in some smaller countries, is still around 20 to 1. 15. Observers differ as to whether the rise is due to competition for talent or due to lack of control by compensation committees. 16. In recent years, investors have demanded more say over executive pay. 17. Diversity. Main article, Gender diversity in the boardroom. Lack of diversity amongst chief executives has also been a source of criticism. 18. In 2018, 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs were women. 19. In 2023 the number rose to 10.4% for women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. 20. The reasons for this are explained or justified in various ways, and may include biological sex differences, Male and female differences in Big Five personality traits and temperament, sex differences in psychology and interests, maternity and career breaks, hypergamy, phallogocentrism, the existence of old boy networks, tradition, and the lack of female role models in that regard. 21, 22, 23. Some countries have passed laws mandating boardroom gender quotas. 24. In 2023, Rockefeller Foundation awarded a grant to Korn Ferry to research strategies and then action a plan to help more women to become CEOs. 25. CEO succession. CEO of public schools. City manager. Executive officer. Glass cliff. List of books written by CEOs. List of chief executive officers. Occupational Information Network. Prime Minister. United States Department of Labor. CEO succession refers to the process by which boards of directors ensure that their organization has the ability to sustain excellence in CEO leadership over time, with transitions from one leader to the next. 1. Commercial importance. CEO succession is one of key functions of a board of directors. Changing the head of an enterprise impacts company culture, board/CEO relations, and perceptions from multiple constituencies inside and outside the business. The disruption that occurs can impact performance in a positive, neutral, or negative manner. Successful companies manage this process well in advance with a concerted set of processes and milestones. Effective CEO succession requires a well-defined program that ensures a supply of highly capable candidates ready to assume the CEO position, whether through an unexpected event or a planned transition. Success or failure of a CEO transition is influenced by a host of obvious and non-obvious factors, many of them of a social/psychological nature. How these factors are managed can have an enormous impact on the performance and status of the organization. Regulatory opinion. In an October 2009 release, 2, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission effectively removed the ordinary business exclusion defense used by companies reluctant to disclose their CEO succession process to shareholders. The policy change allows for a new wave of corporate governance scrutiny, as regulators and shareholders increasingly focus on CEO succession practices. Staff Bulletin, SLB 14E, announced that, in principle, the Commission no longer allows companies to exclude shareholder proposals based on an argument that CEO succession planning is an ordinary business operations matter. In reversing its position, the SEC acknowledged that poor CEO succession planning constitutes a significant business risk and raises a policy issue on the governance of the corporation that transcends the day-to-day business of managing the workforce. The change indicates that regulators have reframed CEO succession as a risk management issue and placed its responsibility firmly in the boardroom. Succession planning responsibilities are redefined as a key board function and a significant policy and governance issue, so that a company is not adversely affected by a vacancy in leadership. 3. Succession options. CEOs can be put in place from multiple options available to any organization, some of which are earmarking and training experienced and high-value internal candidates for taking over the role of an outgoing CEO. Promoters may prefer to elevate family members, co-promoters, as CEO, subject to board of directors approval and investor approval, in case of listed firms. Hiring external CEOs from similar industries, culture and business expertise. This is done by outsourcing the work to executive search firms. A chief executive officer of public schools, or a CEO of schools, is an educational professional who is responsible for the administration of a public school district. Similarly to a receiver, CEOs replace traditional superintendents in managing the daily operations of struggling school districts in an attempt to improve failing schools. With the introduction of private market ideas into the school system, CEOs are generally given unilateral power to enact necessary reforms. This concept was first introduced by the Chicago public school system in 1995. Function and purpose. The functions of the CEO vary from school district to school district. Whereas the CEO mostly replaces both the roles of the school board and superintendent, 1. Other school districts place the CEO below the superintendent and grant power over the day-to-day operations. 2. In Chicago, the CEO has the power to appoint the school board. 3. However, in other school districts with elected school boards, the CEO is often appointed in spite of the board. 4. Using a CEO in a public school system mirrors the typical structure of a charter school which, perhaps, serves as The inspiration for using a CEO of a public school. 5. Comparison to superintendents. A CEO is different from a superintendent in that the CEO of schools has total control over every decision made by a school district. Wink with a frown. 6. The CEO decides what rights, if any, are delegated to the Board of Education. 7. A CEO of schools often needs no background in education. 1. The goal of implementing a CEO of schools is to remove power from school boards of ineffective school districts and replace with an individual to bring private market business ideas to the education system. It is a way to address the inequality of public schools and attempt to raise failing schools to a functional level. Historical development. The first school district in the nation to appoint a CEO was the Chicago Public School District, who appointed Paul Vallis as CEO in 1995. 8. Baltimore implemented reforms to its school system in 1997 which led to the appointment of a CEO. 9. Cleveland soon followed suit by appointing Barbara Byrd Bennett as CEO under mayoral control in 1998. 10. Controversy. The appointment of CEO has proven controversial in some instances. The attempt to appoint a CEO of the Youngstown, Ohio school system has been met with a lawsuit. 11. The lawsuit was unsuccessful. 12. Proponents argue that, by removing local control and placing it in the hands of a CEO, it creates a more efficient system which can turn around the school system. 13. Opponents argue that it strips local control and accountability from the management of the school systems. 14. Another controversy has centered around Barbara Byrd Bennett, the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools and later Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Byrd Bennett was the subject of a 23-count federal indictment accusing her of executing a scheme to give a $20 million no-bid contract in return for a kickback. 15. She entered a guilty plea on October 13, 2015. This article is about city managers in the United States. For county and city managers in the Republic of Ireland, see Chief Executive, Irish local government. For county managers in the United States, see County Executive. Part of the Politics series. Common forms of local government. Executive and legislature separate. Executive and legislature fused. Direct democratic forms. Executive arrangements in England. Icon Politics portal. VEET. A city manager is an official appointed as the administrative manager of a city, in a mayor, council government, council manager form of city government. Local officials serving in this position are sometimes referred to as the Chief Executive Officer, CEO, or Chief Administrative Officer, CAO, in some municipalities. 1. Responsibilities. In a technical sense, the term city manager, in contrast to Chief Administrative Officer, CAO, implies more discretion and independent authority that is set forth in a charter or some other body of codified law, as opposed to duties being assigned on a varying basis by a single superior, such as a mayor. 2. As the top appointed official in the city manager is typically responsible for most if not all of the day-to-day administrative operations of the municipality, in addition to other expectations. 3. 4. Some of the basic roles, responsibilities, and powers of a city manager include supervision of day-to-day operations of all city departments and staff through department heads, oversight of all recruitment, dismissal, disciplining and suspensions, preparation, monitoring, and execution of the city budget, which includes submitting each year to the council a proposed budget package with options and recommendations for its consideration and possible approval. Main technical advisor to the council on overall governmental operations. Public relations, such as meeting with citizens, citizen groups, businesses, and other stakeholders. The presence of a mayor may alter this function somewhat. Operating the city with a professional understanding of how all city functions operate together to their best effect. Attends all council meetings, but does not have any voting rights. 5. Additional duties that may be assigned by the council. 3. 4. The responsibilities may vary depending upon charter provisions and other local or state laws, rules, and regulations. In addition, many states, such as the states of New Hampshire and Missouri, have codified in law the minimum functions a local manager must perform. 6. The city manager position focuses on efficiency and providing a certain level of service for the lowest possible cost. 7. The competence of a city manager can be assessed using composite indicators. 8. Manager members of the International City/County Management Association, ICMA, are bound by a rather rigid and strongly enforced code of ethics that was originally established in 1924. Since that time the code had been updated/revised on 7 occasions, the latest taking place in 1998. The updates have taken into account the evolving duties, responsibilities, and expectations of the profession. However, the core dictate of the body of the code to integrity, public service, seek no favor, exemplary conduct in both personal and professional matters, respect the role and contributions of elected officials, exercise the independence to do what is right, political neutrality, serve the public equitably in governing body members equally, keep the community informed about local government matters, and support and lead our employees have not changed since the first edition. 9. History. Municipal government diagram. Most sources trace the first city manager to Staunton, Virginia, 10, in 1908. Some of the other cities that were among the first to employ a manager were Sumter, South Carolina, 1912, and Dayton, Ohio, 1914. Dayton was featured in the national media and became a national standard. The first City Managers Association meeting of 8 city managers was in December 1914. 11. The city manager, operating under the council-manager government form, was created in part to remove city government from the power of the political parties and place management of the city into the hands of an outside expert who was usually a business manager or engineer, with the expectation that the city manager would remain neutral to city politics. By 1930, 200 American cities used a city manager form of government. 12. In 1913, the city of Dayton, Ohio suffered a great flood and responded with the innovation of a paid, non-political city manager, hired by the commissioners to run the bureaucracy. Civil engineers were especially preferred. Other small or middle-sized American cities, especially in the West, adopted the idea. In Europe, smaller cities in the Netherlands were specially attracted by the plan. 13. By 1940, there were small American cities with city managers that would grow enormously by the end of the century: Austin, Texas; Charlotte, North Carolina; Dallas, Texas; Dayton, Ohio; Rochester, New York; and San Diego, California. 14. Profile. In the early years of the profession, most managers came from the ranks of the engineering professions. 15. Today, the typical and preferred background and education for the beginning municipal manager is a master's degree in public administration, MPA, and at least several years' experience as a department head in local government, or as an assistant city manager. As of 2005, more than 60% of those in the profession had a MPA, MBA, or other related higher-level degree. 16. The average tenure of a manager is now 7 to 8 years, and has risen gradually over the years. Tenures tend to be less in smaller communities and higher in larger ones, and they tend to vary as well, depending on the region of the country. 16. 17. Educational level of local government managers, MYB equals Municipal Yearbook, SOP equals State of the Profession Survey. 5. An executive officer is a person who is principally responsible for leading all or part of an organization, although the exact nature of the role varies depending on the organization. In many militaries and police forces, an executive officer, or XO, is the second in command, reporting to the commanding officer. The XO is typically responsible for the management of day-to-day activities, freeing the commander to concentrate on strategy and planning the unit's next move. Administrative law. While there is no clear line between principal executive officers and inferior executive officers, principal officers are high-level officials in the executive branch of U.S. government, such as department heads of independent agencies. In Humphreys Executor v. United States, 295 U.S. 602, 1935, the court distinguished between executive officers and quasi-legislative or quasi-judicial officers by stating that the former serve at the pleasure of the president and may be removed at their discretion. The latter are removed only with procedures consistent with statutory conditions enacted by Congress. The decision by the court was that the Federal Trade Commission was a quasi-legislative body because of other powers it had, and therefore, the president could not fire an FTC member for political reasons. Congress can't retain removal power over officials with executive function, Bosher v. Sinar. However, statutes can restrict removal if not purely executive, Humphreys Executor, but can't restrict removal of purely executive officer, Myers v. United States, 272 U.S. 52, 1926. The standard is whether restriction impedes the president's ability to perform his constitutional duty, Morrison v. Olson, 487 U.S. 654, 1988. corporate law and other legal associations. In business, executive officers are usually the top staff members of a corporation, the chief executive officer, CEO, being the best-known type. The definition varies. For instance, the California Corporate Disclosure Act defines executive officers as the 5 most highly compensated officers not also sitting on the board of directors. In many insurance policies, executive officer means, in the case of a corporation, any chairman, chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, president, or general counsel. In the case of a sole proprietorship, an executive officer is the sole proprietor. In the case of a partnership, an executive officer is a managing partner, senior partner, or administrative partner. In the case of a limited liability company, an executive officer is any member, manager, or officer. In charity/voluntary sector/nonprofit, the executive officers are those appointed to drive the day-to-day decisions of the organization. This is normally a formal appointment made by the executive board of trustees. Specific responsibilities and scope vary and are usually called out in a governance document. Military. In the units of some military forces, the executive officer is the second in command, reporting to the commanding officer, CO. In most non-naval military services that are land-based, except the U.S. Army, where an executive officer is the second in command of certain units, or in joint military organizations, the executive officer is an administrative staff position versus a command position. Exos in these positions typically assist a commander or deputy commander, or in the case of joint staffs or joint commands, a director, by managing day-to-day activities such as management of the senior officer's schedule, screening of documents or other products, and oversight of the senior officer's administrative support staff. Management of individual assets in the airline industry is derived from the military terminology, where an executive officer or first officer is the second in command of the aircraft. In a fixed-wing aircraft, the first officer sits in the right-hand seat, but on a rotary-wing aircraft, they sit on the left. Management of the airline as a whole is more in line with the corporate example above. India. The term executive officer is used in the Indian Navy. Abbreviated as EXO, the officer is the second in command of a ship or shore establishment. In the Indian Army, second in command, 2IC, is the designation used. United Kingdom. The term XO is not used in most British Army or Royal Marines units, where the designation second in command, 2I/C, is used as a formal appointment. However, the position does exist in some specialist regiments within the Royal Artillery where the exact duties vary. In the Royal Air Force, the term XO is informally used between officers and airmen, referring to the officer who is second in command. It is, however, formally used in the Royal Navy. In smaller vessels, such as submarines and frigates, the executive officer also holds the position of first lieutenant. Originally, the second in command was usually referred to as the first lieutenant, or as number 1, although it is becoming more common to hear the term XO. On larger ships of the Royal Navy, in which the XO holds the rank of commander, the XO is usually referred to simply as the commander. The XO also heads the executive department. United States. United States Army. There are executive officer slots in each company, battalion, regiment, and brigade, though generally not at higher levels of command until the Army level. The XO is typically the second in command, and serves as the day-to-day manager of the command staff. The XO is typically responsible for the management of day-to-day activities, such as administration, maintenance, and logistics, freeing a commander to concentrate on tactical/operational planning and execution and a general officer commander to concentrate on similar planning and execution at the operational strategic level. The XO may take charge in the absence of the commander, the exception being commands with a deputy commander, although recent Army command reductions have either merged the two or eliminated the deputy. A few organizations within the Army maintain authorizations for a chief warrant officer to serve as an XO/2IC. One example of this is the Modular Ammunition Platoon, where the ammunition technician acts as the second in command during the absence of the platoon leader. While the experience gained as an XO is highly beneficial for an Army officer's professional development, it is not necessarily a prerequisite for a command position. At the Army level of command, a commanding general will have a deputy commanding general as second in command and an executive officer on their personal staff who works as their liaison to the general staff and an aide-de-camp who takes care of their calendar and personal needs. United States Marine Corps. The executive officer is the billet of the officer who is second in command at the company/battery, battalion/squadron, and Marine Expeditionary Unit (MU/Regiment/Aviation Group), i.e., Marine Aircraft Group, Marine Air Control Group, and Marine Wing Support Group level. Per the Marine Corps Manual, paragraph 1007.5, the executive officer shall be an officer of the organization who is eligible to succeed to command, and normally will be the officer next in rank to the commander. As the direct representative of the commander, all orders issued by the executive officer shall have the same force and effect as though issued by the commander. The executive officer shall conform to and effectuate the policies and orders of the commander and shall be prepared to assume command at any time the need should arise. At higher levels of command, the second in command is the assistant division/wing commander or, in the case of a Marine Expeditionary Force, MEF, deputy commander. For those commands having a general officer, usually a brigadier general, in command without a designated assistant commander or deputy commander, such as a Marine Expeditionary Brigade, MEB, or Marine Logistics Group, MLG, the Chief of Staff, a colonel, is the second in command. Unlike their U.S. Navy counterparts, XOs of U.S. Marine Corps squadrons in U.S. Naval Aviation do not fleet up to become CO. United States Navy and United States Coast Guard. The executive officer is the billet of the officer who is second in command. An XO is assigned to all ships, aviation squadrons, and shore units and installations, and is responsible to the captain for all ship's work, drills, exercises, personnel organization, and the policing and inspection of the ship. When the ship goes to action stations, the XO confirms that the ship actually is ready for combat and reports this to the captain. The XO's own action station is in a separate part of the ship from that of the captain, so that a single hit will not likely incapacitate both officers. 1. On small ships with no first lieutenant, gunnery officer, or navigator, the executive officer may also be responsible for the duties of those officers. 2. Carrier air wings in the U.S. Navy do not have an XO, but have a deputy commander, DCAG, instead, for shore-based or functional naval air wings headed by a commodore, the equivalent position is the deputy commodore. In the U.S. Coast Guard, on board small cutters and patrol boats that are commanded by either a junior officer or a senior enlisted member, executive chief petty officers or executive petty officers are usually assigned to serve as second in command. On U.S. aircraft carriers, per Title 10 United States Code, both the captain, i.e., the commanding officer or CO, and the XO assigned to the ship are naval aviators or naval flight officers. Although not specified by 10 U.S.C., large, air-capable amphibious assault ships will have one of the two senior positions, CO or XO, occupied by a surface warfare officer and the other by a naval aviator or naval flight officer, alternating at each change of command. In naval aviation, in U.S. Navy squadrons, other than Fleet Replacement Squadrons and the Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron, viz., Blue Angels, the XO will eventually fleet up to become the CO of that squadron after 12 to 15 months as XO. This fleet-up model was also adopted in the early 2000s for XO and CO positions of both large amphibious assault ships, but not aircraft carriers, and Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. In addition to operational and tactical responsibilities, XOs also shoulder most of the CO's administrative burden, to include oversight of the command's administrative officer, if assigned, and administrative department. The term of XO in the Navy and Coast Guard should not be confused with the term Executive Assistant, EA, in those services, the latter being an officer in the rank of Captain, 06, who serves either dual-hatted as, or in addition to, the Chief of Staff to a flag officer. United States Air Force. In the U.S. Air Force, XO is not a command or second-in-command position. Instead, it is used to designate a company grade officer or junior field grade officer who serves as a staff administrative assistant to a senior officer, starting with a commander at the squadron level or above, example, squadron, group, wing, numbered Air Force, Major Command. 3. In the other uniformed services, this position may be called an aide, an executive assistant or an adjutant. Like the Army, while experience gained as an XO is highly beneficial for an Air Force officer's professional development, it is not necessarily a prerequisite for a command position. However, it is often the norm that nearly all Air Force commanders will have been an XO at some point earlier in their careers. 4. 5. For officers holding second-in-command positions, the U.S. Air Force uses the titles of Vice Commander, CV, or Deputy Commander, CD, for an officer who serves as the second-in-command for an organization above squadron level. For a squadron-level organization, the second-in-command is typically termed the Director of Operations or Operations Officer, DO. These latter terms were previously used for similar positions at the group and wing level until renamed as the Operations Group Commander, OG/CC. The rank of an executive officer in the U.S. Air Force can vary from a junior officer supporting a mid-level commander up to a senior field grade, FGO, supporting a general officer. Personal staff officers. The U.S. Air Force uses the term executive officer for officers assigned as personal staff officers to general officers. Their role is similar to aides-de-camp in the U.S. Army, and Marine Corps and flag aides and flag lieutenants in the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. Executive Officer, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. A unique application of the term is Executive Officer to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Commander, United States European Command. This position is typically held by a Brigadier General or Rear Admiral, LH, and is drawn from all of the armed services. The duties involve serving as both an executive assistant to Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SESER, and also includes command responsibilities for the U.S. military community at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in Belgium. 6. This article is about workplace discrimination. For the similarly named developmental psychology experiment, see visual cliff. Part of a series on feminism, history, intersectional variance, conservative variance, religious variance, movements and ideologies, concepts, outlooks, theory, by country, lists and categories, feminism portal, VEET. The glass cliff is a hypothesized phenomenon of women being likelier than men to achieve leadership roles, such as executives in the corporate world and political election candidates, during periods of crisis or downturn, when the risk of failure is highest. 1. 2. Other research has expanded the definition of the glass cliff phenomenon to include racial and ethnic minority groups. 3. Origins. The term was coined in 2005 by British professors Michelle K. Ryan and Alexander Haslam of University of Exeter, United Kingdom. In a study, Ryan and Haslam examined the performance of FTSE 100 companies before and after the appointment of new board members, and found that companies that appointed women to their boards were likelier than others to have experienced consistently bad performance in the preceding 5 months. 4. This work eventually developed into the identification of a phenomenon known as the glass cliff, analogous to the concept of a glass ceiling, but implying the inability to perceive the dangers of the cliff's transparent edge rather than the false promise of elevated organizational positions which can be seen through a ceiling of glass but which are actually unattainable. Since the term originated, its use has expanded beyond the corporate world to also encompass politics and other domains. Overview. Ryan and Haslam's research showed that once women break through the glass ceiling and take on positions of leadership, they often have experiences that are different from those of their male counterparts. More specifically, women are more likely to occupy positions that are precarious and thus have a higher risk of failure either because they are appointed to lead organizations, or organizational units, that are in crisis or because they are not given the resources and support needed for success. 5. 6. Extending the metaphor of the glass ceiling, Ryan and Haslam evoked the notion of the glass cliff to refer to a danger which involves exposure to risk of falling but which is not readily apparent. 5. CEO tenure is typically shorter at companies which are struggling, compared to those which are stable. 7. Evidence of the glass cliff phenomenon has been documented in the field of law. A 2006 study found law students were much likelier to assign a high-risk case to a female lead counsel rather than a male one. 8. A 2010 study found undergraduate students in British political science likelier to select a male politician to run for a safe seat in a by-election, and much likelier to select a female candidate when the seat was described as hard to get. 9. A 2014 analysis of U.S. Fortune 500 leadership found that firms with weak performance were likely to promote women into CEO positions over white men. 10. Additional studies have found that women are likely to be primed as candidates in hard-to-win districts. 11. Specifically in the United Kingdom, women of the Conservative Party are more likely selected by party elites to run in less winnable seats than Conservative men, though they performed worse than men in elections. This occurs both with experienced and inexperienced women candidates, and those with both conventional and non-conventional political backgrounds, indicating a glass cliff phenomenon as opposed to any other explanation. 11. Though the Conservative Party has begun to incorporate equality guarantee strategies, women candidates are still often specifically posed as candidates in hard-to-win districts. Criticism. Other research has failed to confirm the existence of the glass cliff phenomenon. A 2007 study of corporate performance preceding CEO appointments showed that women executives are no more likely to be selected for precarious leadership positions than males. 13. Additionally, the glass cliff phenomenon has only been proven in countries and sectors where masculinity is a highly valuable cultural trait. A study examining glass cliff effects on women leaders in Turkey, a country which has high levels of femininity, found that the preference for female candidates was higher in times of good performance than in times of poor performance. 14. Additional research has affirmed this finding in other countries. 15. Explanation. Many theories have been advanced to explain the existence of the glass cliff. University of Houston psychology professor Kristen J. Anderson says companies may offer glass cliff positions to women because they consider women more expendable and better scapegoats. She says the organizations that offer women tough jobs believe they win either way. If the woman succeeds, the company is better off. If she fails, the company is no worse off. She can be blamed. The company gets credit for having been egalitarian and progressive, and can return to its prior practice of appointing men. 16. Haslam and Ryan's initial studies indicate that people believe women are better suited to lead stressed, unhappy companies because they are felt to be more nurturing, creative, and intuitive. 17. These researchers argue that female leaders are not necessarily expected to improve the situation, but are seen as good people managers who can take the blame for organizational failure. 18. Haslam has shown that women executives are likelier than men to accept glass cliff positions because they do not have access to the high-quality information and support that would ordinarily warn executives away. 19. Additional research has indicated that women and other minorities view risky job offers as the only chance they are likely to get. 7. A 2007 study found that female news consumers in the United Kingdom were likelier than male ones to accept that the glass cliff exists and is dangerous and unfair to women executives. Female study participants attributed the existence of the glass cliff to a lack of other opportunities for women executives, sexism, and men's in-group favoritism. Male study participants said that women are less suited than men to difficult leadership roles or strategic decision-making, or that the glass cliff is unrelated to gender. 20. Additional research has suggested that women see precarious glass cliff opportunities as the only chances for advancement. While men may view the same opportunities as risky, women candidates might be more willing to accept these positions out of necessity for career advancement purposes. 21. Additionally, women are more likely than men to maintain their positions at any level during times of crisis, making them more readily available for advancement opportunities during times of crisis than male counterparts. 22. Women with traditionally feminine traits are sought out in times of crisis due to a perceived ability to better handle employee issues. 23. Stereotypically feminine traits, including creativity, helpfulness, and awareness of emotion, are all associated with better being able to handle failure. Though these traits generally diminish the desirability of women for leadership positions, in times of crisis they are viewed as valuable assets that aid in leadership changes. 15. These skill sets offer opportunities for non-traditional leadership styles, viewed favorably in times of crisis. 24. Glass cliff situations are likely only to arise under certain conditions, in which women leaders have access to resources they view as favorable to leaders. Research has indicated that in times of crisis, women view leadership positions with a greater amount of social resources more positively than they do positions lacking in social resources. However, they view positions lacking financial resources equally as positively as those with a wide range of social resources. 21. Glass cliff for racial and ethnic minority leaders. The glass cliff concept has also been used to describe employment discrimination experienced by leaders who are members of minorities or disabled. 3. Research analyzing the head coaches of NCAA sports teams found that men of racial and ethnic minority groups were promoted to higher leadership positions in times of crisis. Within historically black colleges and universities, minority leaders were more often appointed than white leaders under all circumstances, but in other universities, minority leaders were appointed to leadership positions primarily in times of crisis. These leaders are also likely to suffer from high visibility, scrutiny and performance pressures that their white counterparts do not receive. The study also found evidence for the savior effect, the idea that organizations will look for saviors, usually white, when minority leaders are unable to deliver high-quality performance results in times of crisis. 3. President Barack Obama taking the oath of office in January 2009. Outside of the NCAA, this has occurred in the political sphere. Oftentimes, the 2008 election of Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States of America, in the midst of a global financial crisis is viewed as evidence of the glass cliff phenomenon for racial and ethnic minority groups. 25. Within British politics, research has indicated that conservative black and minority ethnic seats are harder to win than other conservative seats, indicating similar findings. Other research on the political glass cliff for women candidates. 12. This phenomenon is specific, however, to the Conservative Party, which has traditionally promoted anti-immigration sentiments that may contribute to this. 12. Minority women face a duplicated glass cliff, being affected by both their gender and race. 26. Black women are often given unsustainable amounts of work in higher positions, creating barriers in their careers. It has additionally been argued black women may be promoted to leadership positions due to outdated stereotypes related to masculine traits black women are perceived to have. 27. In addition to struggles related to leadership, black women are also likely to face an added weight of microaggressions and increased questioning of qualifications. 28. Implications for women and minority group executives. Glass cliff positions risk hurting the women executives' reputations and career prospects because, when a company does poorly, people tend to blame its leadership without taking into account situational or contextual variables. 4. Additionally, women who are appointed to glass cliff positions may be subject to increased criticism from shareholders, who may lack confidence in their leadership. In contrast, men who assume leadership in times of crisis are less likely to experience this backlash, and suffer fewer reputation-based consequences. 4. Researchers have found that female leaders find it harder than male ones to get second chances once they have failed due to having fewer mentors and sponsors and less access to a protective old boys network. 29. The glass cliff phenomenon adds to the breadth of work on why women are less likely than men to succeed in leadership positions across a wide range of opportunities, from local school districts to the corporate sphere. 23. As a method of descriptive representation, women who see women leaders disposed of as a result of glass cliff leadership may be less likely to see themselves in positions of power, and be less likely to express interest in career advancement. However, some researchers argue that companies in bad situations offer more opportunities for power and influence compared with companies that are stable. Political examples. In 1990, 2 female premiers were appointed in Australia. Joan Kirner inherited a significant deficit in Victoria, while Carmen Lawrence headed a party that had previously been accused of corruption. 30. In 2009, Christina Keneally was appointed Premier of New South Wales amid low polling for her party and their eventual defeat in 2011. 31. Julia Gillard was appointed as Australia's first female Prime Minister and subsequently ousted amid procedural complaints about the leadership spill. 32. 33. In 1993, the Canadian Progressive Conservative Party, facing low approval ratings and almost assured loss in the upcoming general elections, elected Kim Campbell, then Defence Minister, to replace Brian Mulroney as its leader. The election dealt the Progressive Conservatives one of the most devastating defeats in Canadian history, reducing them from 156 seats to 234. In 2009, Indonesian Finance Minister Sri Mulyani was accused of misappropriating the country's funds to conduct an alleged unauthorized bailout for Bank Century a year prior, which was failing at the time. She contested that the $7,710,000,000 bailout was necessary, in order to prevent the country's economy from crashing, and received a warning of the bank's impending failure from the central bank. 35. She decided to resign as finance minister in 2010 after 5 years and 7 months in office during Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono's presidency, keeping the country's economy stable during the world financial crisis. Dilma Rousseff during her 2016 impeachment trial. In 2010, Dilma Rousseff was appointed candidate for president of Brazil by Partido dos Trabalhadores, Labour Party, when they were being investigated by the federal police for allegations of corruption schemes. She won the elections and later, in 2014, the re-election. She was then impeached in 2016. In 2016, Theresa May became leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom shortly after a referendum result to leave the EU caused the pound to drop in value to levels not seen in 30-plus years, 36. In 2019, Sophie Wilmes became the first woman Prime Minister in Belgium during the coronavirus crisis. In 2020, Agnes Buzyn replaced Benjamin Griveaux as the LREM candidate for mayor of Paris, after the initial candidate's explicit photos are revealed. In 2020, Chrystia Freeland was appointed as Canada's first female federal finance minister during the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. 37. Her appointment to Minister of Finance was a direct result of former Minister Bill Morneau's We Charity scandal. In 2021, Kamala Harris was tapped to lead the response to challenges at the U.S. southern border, which has historically been a significant and polarized issue in American politics. 38. Corporate and business examples. In 2002, then-unprofitable telecommunications company Lucent Technologies appointed Patricia Russo CEO, and then replaced her with Ben Verwaayen. 7. In 2008, after the Icelandic banking crisis, various women were appointed to repair the industry with the rationale that broader perspectives would prevent the same mistakes from occurring. 39. In 2011, a horrible time for newspapers, Jill Abramson was appointed editor of the New York Times, and in 2014 she was fired. 40. In 2012, Marissa Mayer was appointed as the CEO of Yahoo after it lost significant market share to Google. 41. 42. In 2015, Ellen Pao resigned amidst controversy after several months as CEO of Reddit. 43. Much of the furor was directed at the firing of popular Reddit employee Victoria Taylor, though former Reddit CEO Ishan Wang revealed that this was the decision of co-founder Alexis Ohanian, not Pao. 44. 45. 46. In 2021, Alexis George was appointed as the CEO of the troubled Australian financial services company AMP Limited. 47. In 2021, Jen O'Neill was appointed the first female lead of Blizzard Entertainment after the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing versus Activision Blizzard lawsuit, which alleged the company had a culture of sexual misconduct. 48. In 2023, Linda Yaccarino was appointed as the CEO of Twitter while the company was facing an uncertain future and a number of challenges, including outages, user discontent and advertiser skepticism. The company lost more than half of its value since its acquisition by Elon Musk 6 months prior. 49, 50, 51. Title Author Company Year. Untitled Autobiography of Andrew Carnegie. 1. Andrew Carnegie Carnegie Steel 1920. My Life and Work Henry Ford Ford Motor Company 1922. Pizza Tiger Monahan, Tom Domino's Pizza 1986. Dave's Way Thomas, Dave Wendy's 1992. Bloomberg by Bloomberg, 2. Michael Bloomberg Bloomberg 1997. The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. 3. Robert Iger The Walt Disney Company 2019. Invent and Wander. 4. Bezos, Jeff Amazon 2021. Winning. 5. Welch, Jack General Electric 2005. Rework. 6. Jason Fried Basecamp 2010. The Martha Rules, 10 Essentials for Achieving Success as You Start, Grow, or Manage a Business. Stewart, Martha 2005. Execution, The Discipline of Getting Things Done. Bossity, Larry General Electric, Honeywell 2002. Eat More Chicken, Inspire More People. S. Truett Kathy Chick-fil-A 2002. My Life and Principles for Success. 7. Ross Perot Electronic Data Systems 2002, 2nd ed. Time to Make the Donuts. 8. 9. Rosenberg, William Dunkin' Donuts 2001. Straight from the Gut. Welch, Jack General Electric 2001. Business at the Speed of Thought. 10. Gates, Bill Microsoft 1999. Direct from Dell, Strategies that Revolutionized an Industry. Dell, Michael Dell 2000. Father, Son and Company, My Life at IBM and Beyond. Watson, Jr., Thomas J. IBM 2000, reprint. Pour Your Heart Into It, How Starbucks Built a Company One Cup at a Time. Schultz, Howard Starbucks 1999. Work in Progress. 11. Eisner, Michael The Walt Disney Company 1999. An Enterprising Life. J. Van Andel Amway 1998. Sam Walton, Made in America. Walton, Sam Walmart 1993. No Excuses Management. Rogers, T.J. 1993. Soros on Soros, Staying Ahead of the Curve, 12, George Soros Soros Fund Management, 1995. Only the Paranoid Survive Grove, Andrew Intel, 1996. The HP Way, How Bill Hewlett and I Built Our Company Packard, David Hewlett Packard, 1996. Personal History, 13, Katharine Graham Washington Post, 1998. My Years with General Motors Sloan, Alfred General Motors 1990, reprint. Life as I Have Known It Has Been Finger Lickin' Good Harland Sanders Kentucky Fried Chicken 1974. Iacocca, An Autobiography, 14, Iacocca, Lee 1984. Grinding It Out, The Making of McDonald's Crock, Ray McDonald's 1976, reprint 1990. J.R.D. Tata, Beyond the Last Blue Mountain R. M. Lala Tata Group. The Science of Success, How Market-Based Management Built the World's Largest Private Company, 15, 16, Charles Koch Industries, 2007. Call Me Ted Turner CNN 2008. Behind the Cloud Mark Benioff Salesforce.com, 2009. Delivering Happiness, A Path to Profits, Passion, and Purpose Tony C. Zappos 2010. The Startup of You Reid Hoffman LinkedIn 2012. Confessions of an Advertising Man David Ogilvy and Mather 1963. Simply Rich DeVos Amway 2014. How Google Works Eric Schmidt Google 2014. Shoe Dog Phil Knight Nike 2016. Papa, The Story of Papa John's Pizza John Schnatter Papa John's Pizza 2017. Hit Refresh Satya Nadella Microsoft 2017. Winner's Dream Bill McDermott SAP 2014. Onward Howard Schultz Starbucks 2011. The Occupational Information Network, O*Net, is a free online database that contains hundreds of job definitions to help students, job seekers, businesses and workforce development professionals to understand today's world of work in the United States. It was developed under the sponsorship of the U.S. Department of Labor/Employment and Training Administration, USDOL/ETA, through a grant to the North Carolina Employment Security Commission, now part of the NC Commerce Department, during the 1990s. 1. John L. Holland's vocational model, often referred to as the Holland Codes, is used in the interests section of the O*Net. 2. 3. History. From 1938 to the 1990s, vocational lists and employment matching offered by the U.S. government were available through the book, The Dictionary of Occupational Titles or the DOT. The DOT was first published in 1938 and emerged in an industrial economy and emphasized blue-collar jobs. Updated periodically, the DOT provided useful occupational information for many years. But its usefulness waned as the economy shifted toward information and services and away from heavy industry. 2. With the shift in the economy, plans developed to replace the book format of the DOT with an online database. A limited use, preliminary version was released in December 1997, followed by a public edition in December 1998. 2. The O*Net thus supersedes the 70-year-old Dictionary of Occupational Titles with current information that can be accessed online or through a variety of public and private sector career and labor market information systems. 4. The decision to move from the DOT to O*Net remains controversial. Example, Gibson, Harvey, and Harris, 2007, Harvey, 2009, Harvey and Hollander, 2002, even as we approach the 20-year anniversary of its inception. Example, AppDot, 1992. Many applied psychologists have praised O*Net. Example, Peterson, Mumford, Borman, Jeanneret, Fleischman, Levin, Campion, Mayfield, Morgeson, Pullman, Gowing, Lancaster, Silver, and Dye, 2001. 5. O*Net classifies jobs in job families, functional areas which include workers from entry-level to advanced, and may include several subspecialties. 6. After the third major revision of O*Net realigned all O*Net occupations to conform to the newly mandated Standard Occupational Classification, SOC, O*Net, with less than 1,000 listed occupational categories, compares to over 13,000 occupations in the last published DOT. 7. Overview. The O*Net system varies from the DOT in a number of ways. It is a digital database which offers a flexible system, allowing users to reconfigure data to meet their needs as opposed to the fixed format of the DOT. It reflects the employment needs of an information society rather than an industrial society. costs the government and users much less than a printed book would, and is easier to update as new data is collected. 2. The U.S. Department of Labor/Employment and Training Administration, USDOL/ETA, describes the O*net as a database of occupational requirements and worker attributes. It describes occupations in terms of the skills and knowledge required, how the work is performed, and typical work settings. It can be used by businesses, educators, job seekers, human resources professionals, and the publicly funded workforce investment system to help meet the talent needs of our competitive global economy. O*net information helps support the creation of industry competency models. 4. For each job, O*net provides the following information. Personal requirements, the skills and knowledge required to perform the work. Personal characteristics, the abilities, interests, and values needed to perform the work. Experience requirements, the training and level of licensing and experience needed for the work. Job requirements, the work activities and context, including the physical, social, and organizational factors involved in the work. Labor market, the occupational outlook and the pay scale for the work. 8. A prime minister, premier or chief of cabinet is the head of the cabinet and the leader of the ministers in the executive branch of government, often in a parliamentary or semi-presidential system. Under those systems, a prime minister is not the head of state, but rather the head of government, serving as the principal administrator under either a monarch in a monarchy or a president in a republican form of government. In parliamentary systems fashioned after the Westminster system, the prime minister is the presiding and actual head of government and head/owner of the executive power. In such systems, the head of state or their official representative, example, monarch, president, governor-general, usually holds a largely ceremonial position, although often with reserved powers. Under some presidential systems, such as South Korea and Peru, the prime minister is the leader or most senior member of the cabinet, not the head of government. In many systems, the prime minister selects and may dismiss other members of the cabinet and allocates posts to members within the government. In most systems, the prime minister is the presiding member and chairman of the cabinet. In a minority of systems, notably in semi-presidential systems, a prime minister is the official appointed to manage the civil service and execute the directives of the head of state. Part of the politics series on executive government. Head of state. Monarch, supreme leader, president of the Council of State. Government. Head of government. Chancellor, chief executive, chief minister, first minister. Premier, prime minister, president of the Council of Ministers, president of the government. Cabinet. Government formation. Cabinet, collective responsibility. Ministry. Minister, secretary. Other. Governor, mayor. Systems. Monarchy, constitutional. Republic, parliamentary. Directorial. Parliamentary, Westminster. Semi-parliamentary, simul. Semi-presidential, cohabitational. Presidential. Lists. National governments. Heads of state and government. Politics portal. Veet. Today, the Prime Minister is often, but not always, a member of the legislature or its lower house, and is expected with other ministers to ensure the passage of bills through the legislature. In some monarchies, the monarch may also exercise executive powers, known as the royal prerogative, without the approval of Parliament. As well as being head of government, being Prime Minister may require holding other roles or posts. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, for example, is also First Lord of the Treasury and Minister for the Civil Service. Note 1. In some cases, Prime Ministers may choose to hold additional ministerial posts, e.g. when the portfolio is critical to that government's mandate during the Second World War. Winston Churchill was also Minister of Defense, although there was then no Ministry of Defense. Another example is the 34th Government of Israel, 2015 to 2019, when Benjamin Netanyahu at one point served as the Prime Minister and Minister of Communications, Foreign Affairs, Regional Cooperation, Economy, Defense and Interior. Etymology. The term Prime Minister is attested in 17th-century sources referring to Cardinal Richelieu, 1, after he was named Premier Minister to head the French Royal Council in 1624. The title was used alongside the Principal Minister d'État, Chief Minister of the State, more as a job description. After 1661, Louis XIV and his descendants refused to allow one of their ministers to be more important than the others, so the term was no longer in use. 2. In the 18th century in the United Kingdom, members of Parliament disparagingly used the title in reference to Sir Robert Walpole, whose official title was First Lord of the Treasury. During the whole of the 18th century, Britain was involved in a prolonged conflict with France, periodically bursting into all-out war, and Britons took outspoken pride in their liberty as contrasted to the tyranny of French absolute monarchy. Therefore, being implicitly compared with Richelieu was no compliment to Walpole. Over time, however, the title became honorific, and remains so in the 21st century. 3. Origins. Further information: Chief Minister of England and Chief Minister of France. The monarchs of England and the United Kingdom had ministers in whom they placed special trust and who were regarded as the head of the government. Examples were Thomas Cromwell under Henry VIII, William Cecil, Lord Burleigh under Elizabeth I, Clarendon under Charles II and Godolphin under Queen Anne. These ministers held a variety of formal posts, but were commonly known as the Minister, the Chief Minister, the First Minister and finally the Prime Minister. The power of these ministers depended entirely on the personal favour of the monarch. Although managing the Parliament was among the necessary skills of holding high office, they did not depend on a parliamentary majority for their power. Although there was a cabinet, it was appointed entirely by the monarch, and the monarch usually presided over its meetings. When the monarch grew tired of a first minister, he or she could be dismissed, or worse, Cromwell was executed and Clarendon driven into exile when they lost favour. Kings sometimes divided power equally between two or more ministers to prevent one minister from becoming too powerful. Late in Anne's reign, for example, the Tory ministers Harley and Viscount Bolingbroke shared power. Development. The prime ministers of 5 members of the Commonwealth of Nations at the 1944 Commonwealth Prime Ministers Conference. In the mid-17th century, after the English Civil War, 1642–1651, Parliament strengthened its position relative to the monarch, then gained more power through the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and passage of the Bill of Rights in 1689. 4. The monarch could no longer establish any law or impose any tax without its permission, and thus the House of Commons became a part of the government. It is at this point that a modern style of prime minister begins to emerge. 5. 6. A tipping point in the evolution of the prime ministership came with the death of Anne in 1714 and the accession of George I to the throne. George spoke no English, spent much of his time at his home in Hanover, and had neither knowledge of, nor interest in, the details of English government. In these circumstances it was inevitable that the king's first minister would become the de facto head of the government. From 1721, this was the Whig politician Robert Walpole, who held office for 21 years. Walpole chaired cabinet meetings, appointed all the other ministers, dispensed the royal patronage and packed the House of Commons with his supporters. Under Walpole, the doctrine of cabinet solidarity developed. Walpole required that no minister other than himself have private dealings with the king, and also that when the cabinet had agreed on a policy, all ministers must defend it in public or resign. As a later prime minister, Lord Melbourne, said, "It matters not what we say, gentlemen, so long as we all say the same thing." Walpole always denied that he was prime minister, and throughout the 18th century parliamentarians and legal scholars continued to deny that any such position was known to the Constitution. George II and George III made strenuous efforts to reclaim the personal power of the monarch, but the increasing complexity and expense of government meant that a minister who could command the loyalty of the Commons was increasingly necessary. The long tenure of the wartime Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, 1783–1801, combined with the mental illness of George III, consolidated the power of the post. The title Prime Minister was first referred to on government documents during the administration of Benjamin Disraeli but did not appear in the formal British order of precedence until 1905. The prestige of British institutions in the 19th century and the growth of the British Empire saw the British model of cabinet government, headed by a Prime Minister, widely copied, both in other European countries and in British colonial territories as they developed self-government. 7, 8, 9, in some places alternative titles such as Premier, Chief Minister, First Minister of State, President of the Council or Chancellor were adopted, but the essentials of the office were the same. Modern usage. In the late 20th century, 10, 11, many of the world's countries had prime ministers or equivalent ministers, holding office under either constitutional monarchies or ceremonial presidents. The main exceptions to this system include Switzerland and the United States, as well as the presidential republics in Latin America, such as Chile and Mexico, modeled on the U.S. system in which the president directly exercises executive authority. Bahrain's former prime minister, Sheikh Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa, occupied the post for about 50 years, from 1970 to November 2020, making him the longest-serving non-elected prime minister. Overview of the office. In monarchies and in republics. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, 1889 to 1964, the first prime minister of India. The post of prime minister may be encountered both in constitutional monarchies, such as Belgium, Denmark, Japan, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Malaysia, Morocco, Spain, Note 2, Sweden, Thailand, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, and in parliamentary republics, in which the head of state is an elected official, such as Bangladesh, Finland, the Czech Republic, France, Greece, Hungary, India, Indonesia, 1945 to 66, Ireland, Nigeria, 1960 to 66, Pakistan, Portugal, Montenegro, Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Turkey, 1923 to 2018, and Italy. See also First Minister, Premier, Chief Minister, Chancellor, Taoiseach, Minister of State, Staatsminister, President of the Government, President of the Council of Ministers and Secretary of State, alternative titles usually equivalent in meaning to, or translated as, Prime Minister. Both Indonesia and Nigeria lost their positions as prime ministers in 1966. Brazil, Iran, the Philippines and Turkey also lost their positions as prime ministers. Chile, Mexico, Switzerland and the United States never had positions as prime ministers. This contrasts with the presidential system, in which the president, or equivalent, is both the head of state and the head of the government. In some presidential and all semi-presidential systems, such as those of Algeria, Argentina, China, France, Poland, Russia, South Korea or Ukraine, the prime minister is an official generally appointed by the president but usually approved by the legislature and responsible for carrying out the directives of the president and managing the civil service. The Premier of the Republic of China, Taiwan, is also appointed by the president but does not require any approval by the legislature, citation needed. Appointment of the Prime Minister of France does not require any approval by the Parliament either, but the Parliament may force the resignation of the government. In these systems, it is possible for the President and the Prime Minister to be from different political parties if the legislature is controlled by a party different from that of the President. When it arises, such a state of affairs is usually referred to as political cohabitation, citation needed. Entry into office. In parliamentary systems, a prime minister may enter into office by several means. The head of state appoints a prime minister, of their personal choice, example, France, where the president has the power to appoint the prime minister of their choice, though the National Assembly can force a government to resign, they cannot nominate or appoint a new candidate. While in practice most prime ministers under the Westminster system, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Malaysia, India and the United Kingdom, are the leaders of the largest party or coalition in Parliament, technically the appointment of the Prime Minister is de jure exercised by the head of state. The head of state appoints a Prime Minister who has a set timescale within which they must gain a vote of confidence, example, Italy, Romania, Thailand. The head of state appoints a formateur from among the members of Parliament, who then has a set timescale within which they must form a cabinet and receive the confidence of Parliament after presenting the cabinet composition and legislative program to Parliament, and the formateur becomes Prime Minister once approved by Parliament, example, Israel. The head of state appoints the leader of the political party with the majority of the seats in the Parliament as Prime Minister. If no party has a majority, then the leader of the party with a plurality of seats is given an exploratory mandate to receive the confidence of the Parliament within 3 days. If this is not possible, then the leader of the party with the second highest seat number is given the exploratory mandate. If this fails, then the leader of the third largest party is given it and so on, example, Greece, see Prime Minister of Greece. The head of state nominates a candidate for Prime Minister who is then submitted to Parliament for approval before appointment as Prime Minister. Example, Spain, where the king sends a nomination to Parliament for approval. Also Germany, where under the German Basic Law, Constitution, the Bundestag votes on a candidate nominated by the federal president. In the Philippines under the 1973 Constitution as amended after martial law, the Prime Minister was elected by the Batasang Pambansa legislature upon nomination by the President. In these cases, Parliament can choose another candidate who then would be appointed by the head of state, or, in the case of the Philippines, outright elect that candidate. Parliament nominates a candidate who the head of state is then constitutionally obliged to appoint as Prime Minister, example, Ireland, where the President appoints the Taoiseach on the nomination of Dáil Éireann. Also Japan. Election by the legislature, example, the Philippines under the unamended 1973 Constitution, where the Prime Minister was supposed to be elected by the Batasang Pambansa. These provisions were never used because the Philippines was under martial law at the time. Also Vanuatu. Direct election by popular vote, example, Israel, 1996 to 2001, where the Prime Minister was elected in a general election, with no regard to political affiliation. Nomination by a state office holder other than the head of state or his or her representative, example, under the modern Swedish instrument of government, the power to appoint someone to form a government has been moved from the monarch to the Speaker of the Parliament and the Parliament itself. The Speaker nominates a candidate, who is then elected to Prime Minister, Statsminister, by the Parliament if an absolute majority of the members of Parliament does not vote no, i.e. he can be elected even if more MPs vote no than yes. Exit from office. Most prime ministers in parliamentary systems are not appointed for a specific term in office and in effect may remain in power through a number of elections and parliaments. For example, Margaret Thatcher was only ever appointed prime minister on one occasion, in 1979. She remained continuously in power until 1990, though she used the assembly of each House of Commons after a general election to reshuffle her cabinet. Some states, however, do have a term of office of the Prime Minister linked to the period in office of the Parliament. Hence the Irish Taoiseach is formally renominated after every general election. Some constitutional experts have questioned whether this process is actually in keeping with the provisions of the Irish Constitution, which appear to suggest that a Taoiseach should remain in office, without the requirement of a renomination, unless the Prime Minister has clearly lost the general election. The position of Prime Minister is normally chosen from the political party that commands majority of seats in the lower house of Parliament. In parliamentary systems, governments are generally required to have the confidence of the lower house of Parliament, though a small minority of parliaments, by giving a right to block supply to upper houses, in effect make the cabinet responsible to both houses, though in reality upper houses, even when they have the power, rarely exercise it. Where they lose a vote of confidence, have a motion of no confidence passed against them, or where they lose supply, most constitutional systems require either a letter of resignation or a request for parliamentary dissolution. The latter in effect allows the government to appeal the opposition of Parliament to the electorate. However, in many jurisdictions a head of state may refuse a parliamentary dissolution, requiring the resignation of the Prime Minister and his or her government. In most modern parliamentary systems, the Prime Minister is the person who decides when to request a parliamentary dissolution. Older constitutions often vest this power in the cabinet. In the United Kingdom, for example, the tradition whereby it is the Prime Minister who requests a dissolution of Parliament dates back to 1918. Prior to then, it was the entire government that made the request. Similarly, though the modern 1937 Irish Constitution grants to the Taoiseach the right to make the request, the earlier 1922 Irish Free State Constitution vested the power in the Executive Council, the then name for the Irish Cabinet. In Australia, the Prime Minister is expected to step down if they lose the majority support of their party under a spill motion, as have many such as Tony Abbott, Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull. Organizational structure. Main article. Cabinet Department. The Prime Minister's executive office is usually called the Office of the Prime Minister or Cabinet Office. The UK's Cabinet Office includes the Prime Minister's office. Conversely, some Prime Minister's offices incorporate the role of Cabinet, while Australia's Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet joins them at par. In Israel, the Prime Minister's executive office is officially titled the Prime Minister's Office in English, but the original Hebrew term can also be translated as the Prime Minister's Ministry. The Prime Minister's Department is also used, as is Cabinet Department. Description of the role. Wilfried Martens, who served as Prime Minister of Belgium, described his role as follows. First of all, the Prime Minister must listen a lot, and when deep disagreements occur, he must suggest a solution to the matter. This can be done in different ways. Sometimes during the discussion, I note the elements of the problem and think of a proposal I can formulate to the council, cabinet, the secretary taking notes. The ministers then insist on changing game ages. The Prime Minister can also make a proposal which leaves enough room for amendments in order to keep the current discussion on the right tracks. When a solution must be found in order to reach a consensus, he can force one or two ministers to join or resign, citation needed. Cross-country comparative details. Titles. In many cases, though commonly used, Prime Minister is not the official title of the office holder. In the Russian constitution, the Prime Minister is titled Chairman of the Government. The Irish Prime Minister is called the Taoiseach, which is rendered into English as Prime Minister. In Israel the Prime Minister is Rosh HaMemshala, meaning head of the government, and the Spanish Prime Minister is the President of the government, Presidente del Gobierno. The head of government of the People's Republic of China is referred to as the Premier of the State Council, citation needed. Other common forms include President of the Council of Ministers, for example in Italy, Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri, President of the Executive Council, or Minister-President. In the Nordic countries the Prime Minister is called Statsminister, meaning Minister of State. In federations, the head of government of a federated entity, such as the province or territory of Canada, the province of Argentina or the state of Brazil, is most commonly known as the Premier, Chief Minister, Governor or Minister-President, citation needed. It is convention in the English language to call nearly all national heads of government Prime Minister, or sometimes the equivalent term Premier, except in cases where the head of state and head of government are one position, usually a presidency, regardless of the correct title of the head of government as applied in his or her respective country. The few exceptions to the rule are Germany and Austria, whose head of government's title is Federal Chancellor, Monaco, whose head of government is referred to as the Minister of State, and Vatican City, for which the head of government is titled the Secretary of State. A standout case is the President of Iran, who is not actually a head of state, but the head of the government of Iran. He is referred to as President in both the Persian and English languages. In non-Commonwealth countries, the Prime Minister may be entitled to the style of excellency like a president. In some Commonwealth countries, Prime Ministers and former Prime Ministers are styled Honourable or Right Honourable associated with their position, the Prime Minister of Australia or the Prime Minister of Canada, for example. In the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister and former Prime Ministers are also often styled Honourable or Right Honourable. However, this is not due to their position as head of government, but a privilege of being current members of His Majesty's Most Honourable Privy Council. 12. In the UK, where devolved government is in place, the leaders of the Scottish, Northern Irish and Welsh governments are styled First Minister. Between 1921 and 1972, when Northern Ireland had a majority-rule parliament, the head of government was the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. In Bangladesh, the Prime Minister is called Pradhan Mantri, literally meaning the head of ministers or Prime Minister. In India, the Prime Minister is called Pradhan Mantri, literally meaning the head of ministers or Prime Minister. In Pakistan, the Prime Minister is referred to as Wazir-e-Azam, meaning Grand Vizier. Entity title. Algeria Arabic. French, Premier Ministre d'Algérie. Australia English, Prime Minister of Australia. Austria Bundeskanzler. Bangladesh Bengali, Pradhan Mantri. Bhutan Lianchin. Uganda Kadakiro. Bulgaria, Ministar Predsedatel. Cambodia, Niuakrot Mantri. Canada English, Prime Minister of Canada. French, Premier Minister du Canada. China Chinese, Guo Yuan Zhongli. Denmark Statsminister. Estonia P Minister. Eswatini Ndunankalu. Faroe Islands Faroese, Ulgmore. Danish, Lagmand. Finland Finnish, Suomenpääministeri. Swedish, Finland Statsminister. France French, Premier Ministre de la République Française. Germany Bundeskanzler. Georgia, Premier Ministry. Greece Prothopurgos tis Ellenikis Dimokratias. Greenland Greenlandic, Nalakersuasit Solitajuajuat. Danish, Landstyrformand. Hungary Ministerelnök. Iceland Forstisrara Islands. India Hindi, Pradhan Mantri. Israel Hebrew, Rosh HaMemshala. Ireland Taoiseach. Italy Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri. Japan, Nikakasori Daijin. Latvia Minister Presidents. Lithuania Ministras Permaninkas. Malaysia Perdana Menteri Malaysia. Malta Prim Ministru ta Malta. Montenegro Premijer Crnigor. Norway Stats Minister. Nepal Nepali, Pradhan Mantri. Netherlands Minister-President van Nederland. Pakistan Urdu, Wazir-e-Azam. Poland Prezes Rady Ministro. Portugal Primeiro-Ministro. Romania Prim-Ministral Guvernului Romaniei. Russia, Predsedatul Pravitelstva Rossiyskoi Federației. Singapore Malay, Perdana Mentari Republic Singapura. Chinese, Xinjiapo Gonghegwo Zongli. Tamil, Sikaperkiarasi Piratamar. South Korea Hangul. Hanja. RR, Gungmachongni. Spain Presidente del Gobierno. Sri Lanka Sinhala, Sri Lanka Agramathia. Tamil, Ilakai Piratamar. Sweden Stats Minister. Thailand, Naok Rathamantri. Ukraine. Premier Minister Ukraini. United Kingdom Prime Minister. Vietnam Thursday Tuong. Constitutional basis for the position in different countries. John A. Macdonald, 1815–1891, first Canadian Prime Minister. Saramavo Bandaranik, 1916–2000, former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka and the first female Prime Minister. British Prime Minister William Pitt, 1759–1806, the youngest head of government at the age of 24. The position, power and status of prime ministers differ depending on the age of the constitution. Algeria's constitution, 1962, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Algeria. Australia's constitution makes no mention of a Prime Minister of Australia and the office only exists by convention, based on the British model. Bangladesh's constitution clearly outlines the functions and powers of the Prime Minister, and also details the process of his/her appointment and dismissal. The People's Republic of China Constitution set a premier just one place below the National People's Congress in China. Premier read as, simplified Chinese, pinyin, zongli, in Chinese. Canada has a mixed or hybrid constitution, partly formally codified and partly uncodified. The codified part originally made no reference whatsoever to a prime minister, 13, and still gives no parameters of the office. Instead, her or his powers, duties, appointment and termination follow uncodified conventions. The Constitution Act, 1867 only establishes the Queen's Privy Council for Canada, to which all federal ministers, among others, are appointed and with members, Note 3, of which the monarch or her Governor-General normally performs executive government, as Queen or Governor-in-Council. 14. The Constitution Act, 1982, adds passing reference to the Prime Minister of Canada, French, Premier Minister du Canada, but as detail of conferences of federal and provincial first ministers. 15. Czech Republic's constitution clearly outlines the functions and powers of the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, and also details the process of his/her appointment and dismissal. France's constitution, 1958, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of France. Germany's Basic Law, 1949, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Federal Chancellor. Greece's Constitution, 1975, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Greece. Hungary's Constitution, 2012, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Hungary. India's Constitution, 1950, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of India. In India, prime ministerial candidates must be a member of parliament, i.e. of either the Lok Sabha, lower house, or Rajya Sabha, upper house. No parliamentary vote takes place on who forms a government. Ireland's constitution, 1937, provides for the office of Taoiseach in detail, listing powers, functions and duties. Italy's constitution, 1948, lists the powers, functions and duties of the President of the Council of Ministers. Japan's constitution, 1946, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Japan. The Republic of Korea's constitution, 1987, sections 86 to 87 list the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea. Malta's constitution, 1964, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Malta. Malaysia's constitution, 1957, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Norway's constitution, 1814, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Norway. Pakistan's constitution, 1973, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Poland's constitution, 1918, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Poland. Spain's Constitution, 1978, regulates the appointment, dismissal, powers, functions and duties of the President of the government. Sri Lanka's Constitution, 1978, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Thailand's Constitution, 1932, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Thailand. Taiwan's Constitution, 1946, lists the powers, functions and duties of the President of the Executive Yuan. The United Kingdom's Constitution, being uncodified and largely unwritten, makes no mention of a Prime Minister. Though it had de facto existed for centuries, its first mention in official state documents did not occur until the first decade of the 20th century. Accordingly, it is often said not to exist. Indeed, there are several instances of Parliament declaring this to be the case. The Prime Minister sits in the cabinet solely by virtue of occupying another office, either First Lord of the Treasury, Office in Commission, or more rarely Chancellor of the Exchequer, the last of whom was Balfour in 1905. In such systems, unwritten and unenforceable constitutional conventions often outline the order in which people are asked to form a government. If the Prime Minister resigns after a general election, the monarch usually asks the leader of the opposition to form a government. Where, however, a resignation occurs during a parliament session, unless the government has itself collapsed, the monarch will ask another member of the government to form a government. While previously the monarch had some leeway in whom to ask, all British political parties now elect their leaders. Until 1965, the Conservatives chose their leader by informal consultation. The last time the monarch had a choice over the appointment occurred in 1963, when the Earl of Home was asked to become Prime Minister ahead of Rab Butler. During the period between the time it is clear that the incumbent government has been defeated at a general election, and the actual swearing-in of the new Prime Minister by the monarch, Governor-General, or President, that person is referred to as the Prime Minister-elect or Prime Minister-designate. Neither term is strictly correct from a constitutional point of view, but they have wide acceptance. In a situation in which a ruling party elects or appoints a new leader, the incoming leader will usually be referred as Prime Minister-in-waiting. An example of this situation was in 2016 in the United Kingdom when Theresa May was elected leader of the Conservative Party while David Cameron was still Prime Minister. Russia's Constitution, 1993, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Russia. Ukraine's Constitution, 1996, lists the powers, functions and duties of the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Lists of Prime Ministers. For a more comprehensive list, see List of current Prime Ministers. Countries with Prime Ministers, blue, those that formerly had that position, dark red, and those that never had that position, gray. The following table groups the list of past and present Prime Ministers and details information available in those lists. Abkhazia 1995, dates Alexander Ankvab. Afghanistan 1927, years Abdul Kabir, acting. Albania 1912, years Edi Rama. Algeria 1962, years Ayman bin Abderrahmane. Andorra 1982, years Xavier Espot Zamora. Angola 1975, dates, post-abolished. Anguilla 1976, dates Ellis Webster. Antigua and Barbuda 1981, years Gaston Brown. Argentina 1993, dates Agustin Rossi. Armenia 1918, dates Nikol Pashinyan. Artsakh 1992, no dates, post-abolished. Aruba 1986, dates Evelyn Weaver Crowes. Australia, list, 1901, dates Anthony Albanese. Austria 1918, years Karl Nehammer. Azerbaijan 1918, dates Ali Asadov. Bahamas 1967, dates Philip Davis. Bahrain 1970, years Crown Prince Salman. Bangladesh, list, 1971, dates Sheikh Hasina. Barbados, list, 1953, dates Mia Motley. Belarus 1919, dates Roman Golovchenko. Belgium, list, 1831, dates Alexander de Croo. Belize 1973, years Johnny Brasinho. Benin 1957, dates, post-abolished. Bermuda 1968, dates Edward David Burt. Bhutan 1952, dates Lotte Tshering. Bosnia and Herzegovina 1945, dates Zoran Tegeltia. Botswana 1965, dates, post-abolished. Brazil 1847, dates, post-abolished. British Virgin Islands 1967, dates Natalio Wheatley. Brunei 1984 no dates Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. Bulgaria 1879 yes dates Nikolai Denkov. Burkina Faso 1971 dates Albert Ouedraogo. Burundi 1961 yes dates, post-abolished. Cambodia 1945 years Hun Sen. Cameroon 1960 dates Joseph Ngudi. Canada, list, 1867 yes dates Justin Trudeau. Cape Verde 1975 yes dates Ulysses Correa S. Silva. Cayman Islands 1992 yes dates Wayne Panton. Central African Republic 1958 dates Felix Malua. Chad 1978 dates Salah Kebzabo. People's Republic of China, list, 1949 dates Li Chang. Comoros 1957 yes dates, post-abolished. Congo, Brazzaville, 1957 yes dates Anatole Colinet Makasso. Congo, Kinshasa, list, 1960 yes dates Jean-Michel Sama Lukonde. Cook Islands 1965 yes dates Mark Brown. Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, 1957 yes dates Patrick Achi. Croatia 1939 dates Andrei Plenković. Cuba 1940 dates Manuel Marrero Cruz. Curaçao 2010 dates Gilmar Pizas. Northern Cyprus 1983 yes dates Unilustal. Czech Republic 1993 years Peter Fiala. Denmark, list, 1848 years Mette Fredriksson. Djibouti 1977 dates Abdulkader Kamil Mohammed. Dominica 1960 dates Roosevelt Scarrett. East Timor 2002 yes dates Tormatan Ruak. Egypt, list, 1878 years Mustafa Madbuli. Equatorial Guinea 1963 dates Francisco Pascual Obama Aswe. Estonia 1918 dates Kaya Kallas. Ethiopia 1942 yes dates Abiy Ahmed. Faroe Islands 1946 years Bur Ostig Nielsen. Fiji 1966 dates Sitavini Rabuka. Finland, list, 1917 yes years Petteri Orpo. France, list, 1589 years Elizabeth Bourne. Gabon 1957 yes dates Alain Claude Bailly Bayens. The Gambia 1961 dates, post-abolished. Georgia 1918 yes dates Irakli Garibashvili. Germany, list, 1871/1949 yes dates Olaf Scholz. The United States Department of Labor, DOL, is one of the executive departments of the U.S. federal government. It is responsible for the administration of federal laws governing occupational safety and health, wage and hour standards, unemployment benefits, reemployment services, and occasionally, economic statistics. It is headed by the Secretary of Labor, who reports directly to the President of the United States and is a member of the President's Cabinet. The purpose of the Department of Labor is to foster, promote, and develop the well-being of the wage earners, job seekers, and retirees of the United States, improve working conditions, advance opportunities for profitable employment, and assure work-related benefits and rights. In carrying out this mission, the Department of Labor administers and enforces more than 180 federal laws and thousands of federal regulations. These mandates and the regulations that implement them cover many workplace activities for about 10 million employers and 125 million workers. Julie Su is currently serving as acting secretary since March 11, 2023 following the resignation of Marty Walsh. The department's headquarters is housed in the Francis Perkins Building, named in honor of Francis Perkins, the Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. History. The former flag of the U.S. Department of Labor, used from 1914 to 1960. In 1884, the U.S. Congress first established a Bureau of Labor Statistics with the Bureau of Labor Act, 3, to collect information about labor and employment. This bureau was under the Department of the Interior. The Bureau started collecting economic data in 1884 and published their first report in 1886. Later, in 1888, the Bureau of Labor became an independent Department of Labor, but lacked executive rank. In February 1903, it became a bureau again when the Department of Commerce and Labor was established. United States President William Howard Taft signed the March 4, 1913, bill, the last day of his presidency, establishing the Department of Labor as a cabinet-level department. William B. Wilson was appointed as the first Secretary of Labor on March 5, 1913, by President Wilson. In October 1919, Secretary Wilson chaired the first meeting of the International Labor Organization even though the U.S. was not yet a member. In September 1916, the Federal Employees Compensation Act introduced benefits to workers who are injured or contract illnesses in the workplace. The act established an agency responsible for federal workers' compensation, which was transferred to the Labor Department in the 1940s and has become known as the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs. 7. Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet member, was appointed to be Secretary of Labor by President Roosevelt on March 4, 1933. Perkins served for 12 years and became the longest-serving Secretary of Labor. During the John F. Kennedy administration, planning was undertaken to consolidate most of the department's offices, then scattered around more than 20 locations. In the mid-1960s, construction on the new Labor Building began and construction was finished in 1975. In 1980, it was named in honor of Frances Perkins. President Lyndon B. Johnson asked Congress to consider the idea of reuniting commerce and labor. 8. He argued that the two departments had similar goals and that they would have more efficient channels of communication in a single department. However, Congress never acted on it. In the 1970s, following the Civil Rights Movement, the Labor Department under Secretary George P. Shultz made a concerted effort to promote racial diversity in unions. 9. In 1978, the Department of Labor created the Philip Arno Award, intended to recognize outstanding career employees such as the eponymous Philip Arno. 10. In the same year, Karen Kloss became the department's first female solicitor of the department. 11. In 2010, a local of the American Federation of Government Employees stated their unhappiness that a long-standing flex-time program reduced under the George W. Bush administration had not been restored under the Obama administration. 12. Department officials said the program was modern and fair and that it was part of ongoing contract negotiations with the local. 12. In August 2010, the Partnership for Public Service ranked the Department of Labor 23rd out of 31 large agencies in its annual Best Places to Work in the Federal Government list. 13. In December 2010, then Department of Labor Secretary Hilda Solis was named the chair of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. 14. Of which Labor has been a member since its beginnings in 1987. In July 2011, Ray Jefferson, Assistant Secretary for Vets, resigned due to his involvement in a contracting scandal. 15, 16, 17. In March 2013, the department began commemorating its centennial. 18. In July 2013, Tom Perez was confirmed as Secretary of Labor. According to remarks by Perez at his swearing-in ceremony, boiled down to its essence, the Department of Labor is the Department of Opportunity. 19. In April 2017, Alexander Acosta was confirmed as the new Secretary of Labor. In July 2019, Acosta resigned due to a scandal involving his role in the plea deal with Jeffrey Epstein. 20. He was succeeded on September 30, 2019, by Eugene Scalia. Scalia served until the beginning of the Biden administration on January 20, 2021. Marty Walsh was confirmed as Secretary on March 22, 2021. 21. He resigned on March 11, 2023 and was succeeded by Deputy Secretary Julie Su, who is currently serving in an acting position. Agencies, boards, bureaus, offices, programs, library and corporation of the Department. Administrative Review Board, ARB. Benefits Review Board, BRB. Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training, BAT. Bureau of International Labor Affairs, ILAB. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiative, CFOI. Employee Benefits Security Administration, EBSA. Employees Compensation Appeals Board, ECAB. Ombudsman for the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Compensation Program, EEOMBD. Employment and Training Administration, ETA. Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Office of Administrative Law Judges, OALJ. Office of the Assistant Secretary for Administration and Management, OSAM. Office of the Chief Information Officer, OCIO. Office of the Assistant Secretary for Policy, OASP. Office of the Chief Financial Officer, OCFO. Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs, OCIA. Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP. Office of Inspector General, OIG. Office of Labor Management Standards, OLMS. Office of Public Affairs, OPA. Office of Public Liaison, OPL. Office of the Secretary, OSEC. Office of the Deputy Secretary, Office of the Solicitor, SOL, Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization, OUIM, Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, OWCP, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, PBGC Office of the Inspector General, Veterans Employment and Training Service, VETS, Wage and Hour Division, WHD, Women's Bureau, WB, Other, Wirtz Labor Library, Job Corps, Relevant Legislation, 1926, Railway Labor Act, 1949, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 81 to 393, 1953, Small Business Act PL 83 to 163, 1954, Internal Revenue Code PL 83 to 591, 1955, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 84 to 381, 1958, Small Business Administration Extension PL 85 to 536, 1961, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 87 to 30, 1961, Area Redevelopment Act PL 87 to 27, 1962, Manpower Development and Training Act PL 87 to 415, 1962, Public Welfare Amendments PL 87 to 543, 1963, Amendments to National Defense Education Act PL 88 to 210, 1964, Economic Opportunity Act PL 88 to 452, 1965, Vocational Rehabilitation Act amended PL 89 to 333, 1965, Executive Order 11246, 1965, McNamara-O'Hara Service Contract Act, 1966, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 89 to 601, 1970, Occupational Safety and Health Act, 1973, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act PL 93 to 203, 1973, Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act PL 93 to 112, 1974, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 93 to 259, 1974, Vietnam-Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act PL 92 to 540, 1974, Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, ERISA, Pub L. 93 to 406. 1975, Revenue Adjustment Act, Earned Income Tax Credit, PL 94 to 12, 164. 1976, Overhaul of Vocational Education Programs PL 94 to 482. 1976, Social Security Act Amendments, Aid to Day Care Centers, PL 94 to 401. 1977, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 95 to 151. 1977, Federal Mine Safety and Health Act. 1978, Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act PL 95 to 523. 1981, Budget Reconciliation Act PL 97 to 35. 1982, Job Training Partnership Act PL 97 to 300. 1983, Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Workers Protection Act PL 99 to 603. 1988, Family Support Act PL 100 to 485. 1988, Employee Polygraph Protection Act. 1989, Fair Labor Standards Amendment PL 101 to 157. 1990, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act PL 101 to 508. 1993, Family and Medical Leave Act PL 103 to 3. 1993, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation and Bankruptcy Act PL 103 to 66. 1996, Small Business Job Protection Act of 1996 PL 104 to 188. 1996, Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act PL 104 to 193. 1996, Veterans Employment Opportunities Act PL 105 to 339. 1998, Workforce Investment Act of 1998. 2014, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act.